This is a lock on a kitchen cabinet inside someone's home. In 1978, 7 families lived in this apartment, and every single one of them locked their food away from their neighbors. Not because they were paranoid, because theft was constant, because a missing loaf of bread could mean your children didn't eat that night. Because in Soviet communal apartments, your neighbors weren't your friends, they were your competition for survival.
Today, you're going to see how communal living destroyed the concept of community, how shared kitchens created enemies, not neighbors, and how a simple padlock became the most important possession in a Soviet household. This is the story of daily warfare over a single stove in a 12-square-meter kitchen where 7 families tried to survive without killing each other.
Elena Petrova, age 32, mother of 2. Moscow, 1975. She came home from work on a Tuesday evening, opened her kitchen cabinet, and found her butter ration gone. An entire week's worth. 200 grams that had taken her 3 hours in line to get. Her children, ages 5 and 7, had been promised bread with butter that night. She'd been promising them all week. Now she stood in the communal kitchen, staring at the empty space where the butter should have been, knowing she had nothing to give them. That night, her children cried from hunger. Well, not hunger exactly. Disappointment. Broken promises. The same black bread again. Dry. No butter. The next morning, Elena bought a padlock. 5 rubles. Nearly a day's wages. She installed it herself while her neighbors watched. No one said a word, but everyone understood. The war had begun. Within a month, all 7 families had locks. The Ivanovs installed 2. The Sokolovs installed 3, one for dry goods, one for their shared refrigerator space, one for the cupboard where they kept tea and sugar. It became an arms race. If your neighbor had 1 lock, you needed 2. If they had 2, you needed better locks, heavier locks, locks that couldn't be picked. The paranoia spread like a virus. People carried their keys everywhere, to the bathroom, to bed. Some women sewed special pockets into their dresses just for keys. Losing your pitching keys meant vulnerability. It meant someone could access your food while you slept. Vera Mikhailovna, a grandmother in apartment 47, carried 17 keys on a chain around her neck. 17 separate locks for 17 separate storage spaces. The chain left a permanent mark on her skin, a red groove that never faded. But locks weren't the only defense. Families became inventive, desperate, paranoid in ways that would seem insane to anyone who'd never been hungry. The Petrov family moved their refrigerator into their bedroom. All 5 of them slept in a room barely 3 meters wide, with a humming refrigerator inches from their heads. The noise kept them awake, but at least their food was safe. Others hid food in bedroom closets, wrapped in layers of cloth to hide the smell from neighbors. Some families buried sugar in flour sacks, creating false bottoms with cardboard. Some families kept their bread under their pillows at night. Anna Borisovna sewed secret pockets inside her winter coat lining. She kept sugar there, just sugar, because sugar was valuable. Sugar was currency, and sugar disappeared faster than anything else. One man drilled a hole in his bedroom floor and created a hidden compartment. He stored his family's meat ration there, beneath the floorboards, like a criminal hiding stolen goods. Except the goods were legally his. He was hiding them from neighbors who would steal them legally too. Living with people you don't trust does something to your mind. You listen for sounds at night. Footsteps in the kitchen at 3 a.m. The creak of a cabinet door opening. The click of something being set down. Your heart races. Is someone in your cabinet? Did your lock hold? You teach your children not to talk about what your family has. Not to mention at school that you have butter, or eggs, or that rare luxury, sausage. Because children talk, and their parents listen, and listening leads to theft. Some families marked their food items with invisible ink. Small dots on packaging, visible only under specific light. Others counted their potatoes every day, weighed their flour, measured their oil by the milliliter. The Soviet system promised a new kind of human, communal, sharing, united in brotherhood. Instead, it created this: But the real warfare wasn't about locks.
7 in the morning, 7 families, 4 burners. The mathematics didn't work. The mathematics never worked. But everyone needed breakfast. Everyone needed it now. And everyone believed their need was more urgent than their neighbors. There was supposed to be a schedule, handwritten on a board hung beside the stove. Monday, Ivanov's 6:30 to 7, Petrov's 7 to 7:30, Sokolov's 7:30 to 8. The schedule was ignored more often than it was followed. Imagine cooking breakfast while 3 other families hover behind you, watching the clock, tapping their feet, sighing loudly. Imagine trying to make Kasha for your children while someone else's pot is pushed against yours, their steam mixing with yours, their resentment palpable in the air. In 1979, the Volkov family's breakfast was destroyed by what the Dmitriev family called an accident. Natasha Volkova was making kasha for her 6-year-old son. It was 7:15. Her scheduled time was 7 to 7:30. She was within her rights, but the Dmitrievs needed to leave early that day. Work emergency, they said. Somehow, accidentally, Mrs. Dmitrieva bumped into Natasha. The pot tipped. Hot kasha spilled across the stove, onto the floor, everywhere. Natasha's son, already dressed for school, started crying. He'd been promised breakfast. Now there was no time to make more. He went to school hungry that day, and Natasha never forgot, never forgave. These weren't accidents. Everyone knew they weren't accidents, but proving intent was impossible. And what would you do even if you could prove it? Call the police because someone bumped you in a crowded kitchen? Each family claimed a burner. Not officially. The schedule said burners were shared, but in practice, invisible territories were established. The Petrovs, front left burner, the Ivanovs, front right burner, the Sokolovs, back left burner, and so on. Families marked their territories with chalk, with tape, with unspoken rules everyone understood but no one acknowledged. Use someone else's burner, and you'd started a Cold War that could last months. One family painted a small mark on their burner. Nothing obvious, just a tiny dot of nail polish on the metal, their way of saying, this is ours. But what happened when all 4 burners were needed simultaneously? Chaos. Silent, seething chaos. Maria Antonovna once placed her pot on what the Kuznetsov family considered their burner. Not because she wanted to provoke them, because all other burners were occupied and her children were hungry and she was desperate. Mr. Kuznetsov walked into the kitchen, saw her pot on his burner, and without a word, moved it to the floor. Still cooking, still hot. He just lifted it off the stove and set it on the floor. Maria stared at him. He stared back. Neither spoke. What was there to say? She put the pot back on the burner. He moved it again. She put it back. He moved it again. This continued for 5 minutes until Maria's husband came home. Then it became a screaming match. Then it became a physical altercation. Then both men were bleeding and both families stopped speaking entirely. Over a burner. Over 12 inches of stovetop space. For a brief period, 6 months, maybe 7, there was peace. Elizaveta Ivanovna, 81 years old, she'd survived the siege of Leningrad, the Stalin purges, 2 wars, and the death of 3 children. 7 families fighting over a stove didn't intimidate her. She established new rules. She enforced them with an iron will and a wooden spoon she wasn't afraid to use. You touch someone's pot, I hit you with this spoon. She did it once. Actually hit a 40-year-old man with her wooden spoon when he deliberately turned down someone else's burner. After that, no one tested her. Under her reign, the schedule was followed, burners were shared fairly, families cooked in peace. But Elizaveta Ivanovna died in the winter of 1980, and with her death, the peace died too. Revenge in a communal kitchen was an art form. Small acts, deniable acts, acts that could never be proven but everyone knew who did them. Salt mysteriously ended up in sugar bowls, but only when the sugar bowl was left unattended. Cooking oil would be borrowed and never returned, or returned empty. Pots would be moved just slightly so your carefully timed meal was ruined by 30 seconds of lost heat. The passive-aggressive notes on the schedule board became legendary. To whoever used my burner at 6:45, you know who you are. God sees everything. Some people think rules don't apply to them. Those people are wrong. If you don't respect the schedule, don't expect respect from others. Some families began cooking at 3 a.m. just to avoid everyone else.
Better to wake up at 3 a.m. than to fight 7 other people for burner space. Olga Stepanovna did this for 4 months. Woke at 3 a.m., cooked breakfast and dinner for the day, went back to bed. She lost 12 kilograms. The stress and sleep deprivation broke her health, but at least she didn't have to face her neighbors. But the stove wars were nothing compared to the detective systems families developed to catch thieves.
The thread trick. Wrap a piece of thread around your jar lid, not just any way, a specific pattern. A pattern only you know. If the thread is disturbed, someone's been in your cabinet. Families developed dozens of these systems. Invisible marks on packaging, a tiny pencil dot in a specific location on the bread wrapper. If the dot's position changed, someone had moved your bread. Daily potato counts. Sound insane? It was. But when you only have 14 potatoes and they have to last a week, you count them every day, morning and night. The Grigoriev family weighed their flour bag every single morning. They kept the scale hidden in their bedroom. Every morning, before work, Mrs. Grigorieva would take the flour bag into the bedroom, close the door, and weigh it. Write down the weight, compare it to yesterday's weight. A difference of 50 grams meant someone had stolen flour overnight. This sounds paranoid. It sounds like madness. But it was necessary. What happened when you caught someone? You had evidence. You had your thread trick, your marks, your weights. You knew someone had taken your food. You even knew who. The evidence pointed to one family, one specific person. Now what? Call the police? The police wouldn't come for missing butter. The police had real crimes to deal with. This was a civil matter, they'd say. Handle it yourselves. Take them to court? To sue for 200 grams of flour? The court would laugh at you. So you confronted them, directly, in the kitchen, in front of everyone. Someone took my sugar. Silence. I know it was you. Denial, always denial. I don't know what you're talking about. My mark was marked. The mark has been disturbed. Maybe you moved it yourself and forgot. Maybe you're a liar and a thief. And now it's a war, a cold war that lasts months, sometimes years. The Ivanov family accused the Sidorovs of stealing buckwheat in 1976. The accusation was probably true. The evidence was compelling. But the Sidorovs denied everything. For the next 2 years, these families didn't speak, passed each other in the hallway without acknowledgement, cooked side by side in the kitchen in complete silence. Their children, who'd been friends, were forbidden to play together. 2 years of Cold War. Over buckwheat. No one ever admitted theft. Ever. Even when caught red-handed, the denial was absolute. I thought it was mine. I mistook your cabinet for mine. Someone else must have moved it. Are you accusing me after everything I've done for this household? The mental gymnastics were impressive. People convinced themselves they weren't thieves. They were just desperate, just hungry, just taking what should have been shared anyway in a truly communist society. One woman, interviewed years later, admitted she'd stolen from neighbors for years, but even in admission, she qualified it. I didn't steal, I borrowed. I always intended to replace it. Things were just so hard. She never replaced anything. Viktor Petrovich, interviewed in 1992, said, "We all knew who took the sugar. Everyone knew, but proving it meant war. Sometimes it was easier to say nothing. Buy more sugar. Lock it better. Pretend you didn't notice. Some families preferred silence over confrontation. Better to lose food than to lose what little peace remained." Others fought. Every theft, every suspicion, every accusation. These families lived in constant conflict, but they felt righteous. They were defending their property, their children's food. And then there was Nina Alexandrovna, who took surveillance to another level entirely. Nina Alexandrovna stationed herself in the kitchen, not to cook, to watch. Every day from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., she sat on a small wooden stool in the corner of the communal kitchen, watching, observing, taking notes. Her official excuse: she was elderly, retired, had nothing better to do. Her real purpose? Catching thieves. She kept a notebook, detailed logs of who entered the kitchen, when, what they did, how long they stayed. If someone opened a cabinet that wasn't theirs, she noted it. If someone glanced at someone else's food, she noted it.
The other families hated her, but they also feared her because Nina saw everything. In rare cases, very rare cases, some families in elite Kommunalkas installed hidden cameras in the 1980s. Actual surveillance cameras, expensive and hard to obtain, but desperate people find ways. These cameras caught thefts on film, undeniable proof. But even with video evidence, what could you do? Show it to the police? They still wouldn't care. So the camera served one purpose: psychological warfare. Let everyone know they were being watched. Let everyone know that privacy was gone, trust was gone. The system had won. Neighbors had become enemies. The communal kitchen had become a battlefield. And some people just gave up. But there were human costs beyond missing food.
The Kommunalka was supposed to create community. That was the theory, the promise. Force people to live together, share everything, and they'll become brothers and sisters in communist brotherhood. Instead, it created the opposite. Tamara Nikolaevna and Svetlana Ivanovna lived as neighbors for 30 years. 30 years in the same apartment, sharing the same kitchen, seeing each other every single day. They never became friends. In fact, by year 5, they stopped speaking entirely. By year 10, they'd perfected the art of avoiding eye contact. By year 20, they could cook side by side at the same stove and pretend the other person didn't exist. 30 years, same kitchen, never spoke. When asked why, years later, Tamara couldn't even remember the original conflict. Something about borrowed milk that was never returned? Or was it about cooking times? Or children making noise? She didn't remember, but the grudge remained. The silence remained. Children grew up in this environment, learning that neighbors were threats, that community was a lie, that trust was for fools. These children became adults who couldn't share, who hoarded, who locked everything, who saw kindness as weakness and trust as danger. An entire generation raised in paranoia. Having to lock your food meant admitting you were poor, that you couldn't afford to lose even a little, that you were vulnerable. But everyone was poor. Everyone had locks. Still, the shame existed. The humiliation of being accused, of being suspected, of living in a place where your neighbors assumed you were a thief. And worse, the humiliation of being so hungry you considered stealing. Marina Pavlovna, age 42, mother of 3, 1983. Her family was having a particularly hard month. Her husband's wages had been delayed. Again, the children were growing and constantly hungry. The rations weren't enough. One morning, very early, she went to the kitchen. She knew the Volkov family kept eggs in their section of the refrigerator. She'd seen them. Just 12 eggs, more than any family needed. She opened their cabinet. She took 1 egg, just 1. She told herself she'd replace it next week. She'd buy extra eggs and put 1 back. They'd never notice. It was just 1 egg. She made it for her youngest daughter, who hadn't had protein in days. And then she cried. For 3 hours, she sat in her room and cried. Not because she'd been caught. She wasn't caught. No one ever knew. She cried because of what she'd become. A thief. Stealing from neighbors who were just as poor as she was. Stealing to feed her children. Becoming exactly what everyone feared. She never forgave herself. Mentioned it in an interview 40 years later and started crying again. 40 years, still carrying the shame. This is what the system did. It didn't just make people hungry, it made them hate themselves for trying to survive. The Soviet system promised equality, promised sharing, promised a new type of human being. Instead, it created an environment where sharing was impossible, where equality meant equal misery, where the new human being was paranoid, distrustful, and desperate. The communal kitchen was supposed to be the heart of the communal apartment, the place where families came together. It became the place where they tore each other apart. Every padlock represented a failure. Not a personal failure, a systemic failure. The locks weren't keeping thieves out, they were keeping desperate people in, trapping them in a system that forced neighbors to compete for scraps, that turned friends into enemies, that made theft rational and trust dangerous. The system had won. It had promised to create community and instead created isolation. Promised to eliminate class conflict
and instead created microscopic warfare over butter and flour. But not everyone gave in to the paranoia.
The Sokolov family never locked their food. Not once, not ever. Their neighbors thought they were insane, or saints, or both. Their food was stolen regularly, weekly, sometimes daily. They knew it was being stolen. Everyone knew. But Dmitry Sokolov said, "We won't let the system destroy our humanity." His children remember eating less than their friends, going to school hungrier, wearing older clothes because money spent replacing stolen food couldn't be spent on clothes. But they also remember something else: pride. The strange pride of resistance. Our father taught us that how we treat people matters more than what we have, that a system built on fear and scarcity wants us to become like animals, and we refuse. Were they fools? Probably. Were they admirable? Absolutely. Their defiance didn't change the system, didn't stop the theft, didn't convince their neighbors to unlock their cabinets. But it proved something. That choice still existed. That even in the worst circumstances, humans could choose kindness over survival instinct. Most families thought the Sokolovs were stupid, wasting food, making life harder than it needed to be. But some families watched them with something like envy, wishing they were brave enough to do the same, wishing they could afford such principles. Despite everything, humanity survived in small ways. Anna Petrovna noticed her neighbor was sick. They weren't friends. They'd barely spoken in years. But the neighbor was sick and alone. Anna left tea outside her door. No note, no acknowledgement, just tea. It happened again a few days later. And again, for 2 weeks while the neighbor recovered, someone left tea. The neighbor never knew who. Sergei Aminovich fixed the Petrov family's stove burner. It had been broken for months. They couldn't afford repairs. One night, after everyone slept, Sergei fixed it, quietly, anonymously. The Petrovs woke to a working burner and never knew who fixed it. There was, in some Kommunalkas, an emergency food fund. One cabinet, unlocked, stocked with basic items, for true emergencies only. It was rarely used. Most people were too proud, or too afraid someone would accuse them of taking advantage. But its existence meant something, a symbol that even here, in this place of locks and paranoia and theft, the idea of community hadn't completely died. Hope in a hopeless place. Late 1980s, the Soviet Union was collapsing. Some Kommunalkas were disbanded. Families finally got separate apartments, private kitchens, private space, privacy. Did they take off the locks? Most didn't. The habit was too ingrained, the trauma too deep. Galina Stepanova moved to her own apartment in 1992. 2 bedrooms, private kitchen, no neighbors. In a 2005 interview, she still had a padlock on her kitchen cabinet. 13 years of living alone, and the lock remained. Why? The interviewer asked. "I can't stop," she said quietly, "even though I live alone now. Even though no one can steal from me, I still lock it every night. Check it 3 times. Make sure it's secure." "But there's no one here to steal from you." "I know," she said quietly, "but I can't stop." The trauma outlasted the system that created it. What does this teach us? That scarcity destroys community. That systems designed to create equality can instead create unprecedented inequality of the soul. That humans under pressure don't always become noble. Sometimes they become small, paranoid, desperate. But also, sometimes they resist. Sometimes they choose principle over survival. Sometimes small kindnesses survive even in hell. The locks came off most cabinets eventually. The Kommunalkas were disbanded. The system collapsed. But some wounds never heal. That padlock in 1978 represented more than theft prevention. It represented the death of trust,
the death of community, the death of the Soviet promise that people could live together in harmony. 7 families, 1 kitchen, 12 square meters. And a simple truth that transcends the Soviet Union, transcends communal kitchens, transcends any specific time or place. When people are desperate enough, even neighbors become strangers. When systems create scarcity, they create enemies. And sometimes, a lock on a cabinet says more about society than any manifesto ever could.